almost 20 years, and I have a lot of fond memories of our relationship. He was an excellent purveyor of dad jokes, often repeating them again and again. Among my favorites was his quip in our region about having to drive west to get to East Souk, drive east to get back to the West Shore, and drive north to get to South Cowichan. The relationship we enjoyed didn't change when he was Premier. Even when he was at a busy community event surrounded by people, he would always make sure to point me out saying, "Hey, there's my MP. John, you were one of a kind. I will sincerely miss you."
Order. The Honourable Member for Longueuil Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, the ACEF in Longueuil is celebrating 50 years of community involvement as an organization that defends consumer rights and promotes financial education. Since 1974, ACEF has supported thousands of local citizens by helping them manage their personal finances, by fighting for responsible consumption, and through their consultations, workshops, and awareness-raising initiatives, ACEF has established itself as a key ally in promoting financial independence and debt prevention. With a committed and caring team, ACEF in Longueuil stands out for its human and personalized approach, offering indispensable support for people when they're in times of vulnerability. This anniversary is an opportunity to salute the tireless work of their staff and volunteers, as well as the profound impact that ACEF has had on the lives of so many families. Today, we are celebrating half a century of solidarity and dedication in the service of the community, and we wish ACEF continued inspiration and continued support towards a more serene financial future for the people of Longueuil. Happy 50th anniversary to the ACEF Longueuil.
The Honourable Member for Stormont Dundas South Glengarry.
The Prime Minister has lost control of spending and his cabinet. Next week's fall update is teeing up to be yet another dramatic disaster because at this point we're not even sure who the Finance Minister is going to be by Monday. The Globe and Mail reports that tensions between the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister have never been worse and getting more intense by the day. She wanted to run a gigantic $40 billion deficit, what she called her guardrail. Now the Prime Minister is pushing her through that guardrail and over the fiscal cliff. And now he learned he wants to humiliate her further by firing her and replacing her with carbon tax Carney. Even Liberal MPs are calling all this chaos out by saying, quote, "The federal budget is not an unlimited pot and we need to show fiscal restraint." Well, that's a little late after 9 years. Yeah. This week, Prime Minister has lost control of immigration, borders, spending, inflation, the debt, and even his ministers. Common sense Conservatives on this side, meanwhile, are fully united behind our leader and ready for a carbon tax election.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener South Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, this holiday, our government followed through on its promise to put more money back into the pockets of Canadians. With a tax cut for everyone, we're making sure businesses can succeed and families can have a little less stress this holiday season. The Conservative leader's response? Instead of supporting Canadian workers, the Conservatives are prepared to cut essential services like childcare, healthcare, and pensions, services that Canadians depend on every day while doing nothing to reduce costs for families. Canadians deserve better than what the Conservatives are proposing. Our tax cut announcement is a perfect example of how our government is ensuring that workers and families can afford what they need and have saved for what they want, while Conservatives shout empty promises.
That's right.
Questions orales. Oral questions. The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
The Prime Minister has lost control of spending and his cabinet, and the fiscal feud over the $40 billion guardrail is worse than we ever thought. New reports show that the Prime Minister is set to replace Canada's first female finance minister with his old boys network pal, carbon tax Carney. And Canadians are on the bus, watching in terror as the Prime Minister is yanking her out of the driver's seat so that Carney can send us smashing through the guardrail and over the cliff. Does the Finance Minister still have her hands on the wheel, and will the deficit be below that $40 billion guardrail?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted that the first question from the Conservatives relates to the economy and the Finance Minister. Let's talk about the work she's been doing on behalf of Canadians. Yesterday, we had a 50 basis point interest rate cut announced by the Bank of Canada. That was the 5th time in a row, leading the entire G7, we've seen the interest rates come down from the Bank of Canada. On Saturday, we have a further great news for details for Canadians, which is a GST tax cut on basic essentials for every Canadian from coast to coast to coast. That's groceries, that's things that you buy for your kids for Christmas. That's great news for Canadians under the leadership of this Finance Minister.
The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
Even the bank admitted that they had to cut rates because the economy is performing so poorly under this NDP Liberal Prime Minister. And, you know, Canada's phantom finance minister has been pulling the strings for a while. Carbon tax Carney has been forcing radical new spending and forcing the finance minister to smash through a $40 billion guardrail. And now that Canadians are fed up and angry, the Prime Minister is going to blame her, dump her, and replace her with Carney. A classic example of an incompetent boss blaming subordinates. Does the Finance Minister not realize that she's about to join a long list of cabinet ministers that have had their careers and their reputations ruined by this Prime Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I'm equally delighted that he's talking about the Bank of Canada, because what has the actual Bank of Canada governor said recently? He said, quote, CPI inflation has been about 2% since the summer, and we expect it to be close to target on average over the next couple of years. On inflation, what has Tiff Macklamachi said? Quote, we are no longer trying to get inflation down. Government spending is not pushing against us getting inflation down. We have brought it down. That's the handiwork of this Finance Minister and this government, generating economic growth and being prudent with fiscal management. That's about inflation being on target 11 straight months, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
If he just read a little further, he'd read that it's not because of anything the government's been doing except causing our economy to slow down and underperform. That's why they've taken this step. But you know, a guardrail is something you're supposed to stay far away from. If you even brush up against it, it's a sign you're way off track. If you smash through it, you go flying off a cliff. Now, even Liberal MPs are terrified and are ringing the bell, trying to get off before they smash through the guardrail. One of them said, quote, I think that if we state that we have a $40 billion guardrail, we better stay within those numbers. And another is begging for a fiscally responsible framework. Will the Prime Minister allow a free vote, or will he force his Liberal MPs to stay on that bus as it goes down the cliff?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Speaker, allow me to reference not just what the domestic Bank of Canada is talking about, but let's talk about what the IMF is stating. The IMF is projecting that Canada will have the strongest economic growth in the G7 on average in 2023 and 2024. Canada is expected to maintain its position as the country with the smallest deficit as a share of GDP among G7 countries, and still by far the lowest general government net debt as a share of GDP in the G7. What's up, Mr. Speaker? Canada's growth and leadership of the G7. That's what's up, and we're proud of it.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Jumeaux-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has lost control over spending and his ministers. The Minister for Finance promised to limit the deficit to $40 billion, but the Prime Minister pushed her to spend more. The Prime Minister, a fake feminist, by the way, can he finally admit that he's already replaced the first female finance minister with Mark Carney, an unelected man who is already pulling the strings behind the scenes? Order. The Honourable Minister for Innovation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have no lessons to learn from the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker. With regards to the economy, Canadians have seen the work put forward by the Liberal government. A key interest rate at 3.25%, Mr. Speaker. A key interest rate that will help families, that will help SMEs, that will help our business people. Soon, there will be a GST vacation. It's Christmas time. I know the Conservatives. I'm sure they have a good heart. Let's celebrate Canadians and our entrepreneurs, and let us celebrate this reduction in the key interest rate. The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Jumeaux-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, now we've seen it all. An incompetent Prime Minister who is pushing his Finance Minister to run up a staggering $40 billion deficit. And now he's blaming her for his failure and is replacing her with an unelected man. And all the while, he struts around equal voice, claiming to be a proud feminist. What hypocrisy! Will the Prime Minister finally admit that his minister is a mere facade now, because he is forcing her to break her promise to respect the $40 billion deficit ceiling? Order, please. Order. The Honourable
Minister for Fisheries and Oceans and Coast Guards. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see that they've learned their lessons across the way. I don't have to repeat myself, but
we have a member from the opposition, a Conservative, a woman who comes from Quebec. How can that kind of person attack our Minister of Finance, who has implemented the Canadian childcare benefit? I hate to interrupt questions, I hate to interrupt answers, but I must ask the member for Louis Saint-Laurent and the member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier to please not order on both sides. Minister. I will ask the Minister for Fisheries and Oceans and Coast Guards to start from the top. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even if there are Conservative men on the other side who are heckling, that doesn't bother me at all, Mr. Speaker. Women are the ones who tackle men head on. And shame on the opposition, because we have a woman from Quebec, a colleague, and she dares attack our Minister for Finance, who has implemented programs like the Canadian childcare benefit, programs that help women when it comes to childcare, Mr. Speaker. We've implemented programs to help children. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Normally, it is here in this House that important votes should take place, but today it's happening in the Senate. Senators will vote upon an amendment that would sabotage C-282 and prevent it from protecting supply management. The non-elected senators will be voting whether or not to respect the desire of elected representatives from all parties to protect our farmers in trade agreements. Has the Prime Minister contacted each of his Senate appointments to tell them to vote on the right side of history, the side of democracy? The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with my colleague. Something important is happening in the Senate today. I would like to remind her, however, that now, under a Liberal government, the Senate is filled with independent senators. However, Conservative senators, they have to toe the party line. So I'd be curious to hear what they have been imposed. In any case, Mr. Speaker, you know that we have worked hard to transmit good information to senators, and we hope that they have understood how important supply management is for Canada and for Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order, please. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. I appeal to all party leaders. Each and every one of them voted to protect supply management in trade agreements through Bill C-282. But today, senators will vote either to respect our will or to overturn the decision in a complete breach of the very basic principles of democracy. Leaders, the farmers of your ridings are watching you closely. Will all party leaders, starting with the Prime Minister, ask senators to defeat the amendment and pass C-282 in its entirety by Christmas? The Honourable Minister for National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supply management is something we believe in. We will continue to protect it. We've also committed to reducing our market share. We have done everything possible to go to the very end of this bill and see it adopted because it is essential. We have to be careful, Mr. Speaker. This bill protects our producers and farmers, but until there is a government that will get rid of supply management. The honourable member for Rosemont La Petite Patrie. Mr. Speaker, we have to protect supply management for farmers and producers in Quebec and throughout the country. Emergency rooms are overflowing. People can't even find a family doctor. The governments in Ottawa and Quebec aren't doing what's needed, and what's more, the private sector is too expensive, it doesn't even work. Therefore, we have fewer services for Quebecers. Let us be clear, Mr. Speaker. Profit has absolutely no place in our healthcare system. It is up to the governments of Quebec and Ottawa to ensure fast and fair access to healthcare. Why aren't the Liberals doing anything at all to defend access to healthcare services for Quebecers? The Honourable Minister for Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, absolutely we are here to defend our universal healthcare system, and this from coast to coast to coast. That is the reason for which we have signed an agreement with every single province and every single territory to the tune of $200 million to improve our healthcare system. Absolutely. Provinces and territories have their responsibilities, but we will always be here to make sure that people can get healthcare.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
Mr. Speaker, last night the Prime Minister met with the Premier to discuss Trump's tariffs. Canadian workers were not consulted, and yet it's their jobs that are at risk. Instead of waiting for the next threat for Trump or premiers running off with their own plans, why not create a Canadian plan that protects and increases our jobs? The Conservatives parrot Trump's talking points even after they fired 1,100 border officers when they were in power. Canada needs to turn the tables on President-elect Trump by promoting Canadian jobs and a workers' plan in manufacturing and natural resources. They have Buy America. Where's our Buy Canada?
The Honourable Minister for International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians can count on our government to play as Team Canada to defend Canada's interests. Prime Minister met with the First Ministers yesterday. I proudly can say in this House that I, along with my colleagues, have met with Canadian workers all across the country from coast to coast to coast to reiterate how important this trading relationship is. Their voices, workers' voices, business voices, and all of our voices matter in this important relationship, and we're going to keep working hard to make sure that this continues to work for Canada.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
The Prime Minister has lost control of spending and his cabinet. The Finance Minister promised to cap the deficit at already reckless $40 billion, but now it turns out the Prime Minister is shoving her through her own guardrail. The fake feminist Prime Minister is setting up Canada's first female finance minister to take the hit for his reckless spending so that he can then officially bring in the unelected man who has been pulling the strings. Why is the Prime Minister bullying the Finance Minister into breaking her $40 billion deficit guardrail promise and forcing her to deliver carbon tax Carney's fiscal update?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
While the Conservatives are focused on this soap opera, Parliament Hill, grapevine, gossip, Mr. Speaker, our Liberal government has been focused on the pocketbooks of Canadians. Inflation is way down. It's at 2%, and the Governor of the Bank of Canada confirmed yesterday that it's going to stay at about 2% for the next few years. Interest rates are way down. We saw another jumbo rate cut yesterday, Mr. Speaker. That means more money in the pockets of Canadians because they're going to be able to renegotiate their mortgage at a lower rate. We're going to be able to help all Canadians that have loans, and our small businesses and entrepreneurs are going to see costs going down.
The honourable member for Battleford's Lloydminster.
Canadians cannot afford this Prime Minister's fake feminism. He had the gall this week to say, and I want you to know that I am and I always will be a proud feminist. You will always have an ally in me and my government. All while working overtime behind the scene to throw Canada's first female finance minister under the bus for his reckless spending. Will the so-called feminist Prime Minister set aside his hypocrisy and admit that he is responsible for forcing the Finance Minister to break her $40 billion deficit promise?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Speaker. I was also at the Equal Voice Gala the other night, and I heard the Prime Minister's speech. I heard him talk about all the tangible measures that we have taken as a government to advance equal rights among genders, including a gender-neutral cabinet, including $10 a day childcare, including a women's entrepreneurship strategy. I also heard the Deputy Leader of the Conservatives and her speech, which completely undermined the whole mission.
I really do apologize. I've been having trouble hearing the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary answer the question. Members really must not take the floor when others are speaking. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Speaker. I was also at the Equal Voice Gala the other night, and I truly enjoyed the Prime Minister's speech, which listed dozens of things that we have tangibly done as a government to advance gender equality, including a cabinet that has equal numbers of men and women, including $10 a day childcare, including a female entrepreneurship strategy, $500 million going out across the country to end the process of gender-based violence. Meanwhile, the Deputy Leader of the Conservatives in her speech completely undermined the whole point of equal voice, Mr. Speaker. It's very telling about what the Conservatives think about equality.
Order. The Honourable Member from Peterborough-Kawartha.
This fake feminist Prime Minister is determined to decimate Canadians' lives by destroying the economy, and he will throw anyone under the bus to do it, including his token finance female minister. Canadians know he's weak. They know he's lost control of his cabinet and his spending. The question is, will the first ever female finance minister have the courage to stand up to that fake feminist Prime Minister and stick to her promised $40 billion deficit?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, here's something tangible that the Leader of the Opposition could do. In the next election, he could run more women, and he could get more women in those seats. If he really wants to prove his credibility in terms of standing up for women, let me just give you some stats, Mr. Speaker. In this current House of Commons, 16.9% of the women elected sit here in the Liberal benches. How many in the Conservative benches, Mr. Speaker? 6%. That's the kind of numbers that we are talking about.
Order. Order. I'm certain all members want to hear the question from the Honourable Member. The Honourable Member from Peterborough-Kawartha.
Mr. Speaker, on the Conservative side of the House, women stand here because we're skilled and we're allowed to use our voice. Mr. Speaker, Jody Wilson-Raybould is testament to this. That is a fake Prime Minister, but that is not the point. We're not here to talk about gender. We're here to talk about the economy, and it is destroyed under that fake feminist Prime Minister. So again, if she is not a token, will she stand up to him and say, no, I will abide by my $40 billion deficit guardrail to help this economy get back on track and save Canadians' lives?
I know that all members are keen to return back to their constituencies for the Christmas break, but until that point, please, let us treat each other with respect. And that means not speaking when the Speaker is standing or when someone is recognized by the Speaker to take the floor. The The Honourable Minister for Crown Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, that woman might feel like a token, but I never do. I earned my seat in this House of Commons. I'm proud of it, Mr. Speaker. And you know why they don't like numbers, Mr. Speaker? Because the numbers don't speak in their favor. There are 30% of these seats taken by women, Mr. Speaker. Fully 17% of those are here over on this side. More than half of the women elected are Liberals, Mr. Speaker, and the other half are the rest of the parties combined. So they should do their job, Mr. Speaker, as parties and get more women to run.
Order! Order! The honourable member who is about to speak is deserving of having her voice heard. The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
The Prime Minister, who has long self-described as a feminist, starting in July and through anonymous sources, have repeatedly maligned Canada's first female finance minister by undermining her competency. This week, reports have suggested that the finance minister has been at odds with the Prime Minister, who's been bullying her to blow back her already exorbitant $40 billion deficit. And now we've got female cabinet ministers defending the Prime Minister's decision to bring in an unelected man to replace her job. Why?
The Honourable Minister for Diversity and Inclusion.
Mr. Speaker, I always find it a bit rich when Conservatives talk about feminism, when their own leader will use hashtags on his YouTube videos to attract men who hate women. Mr. Speaker, it is anything but feminist when they bring forward backdoor legislation to ban abortion in this country, or when they all vote against increased funding to combat gender-based violence or to support survivors. Their leader doesn't care about women or equality. He only cares about himself. Shame on them, Mr. Speaker.
Order. The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, the fact remains, Mr. Speaker, that after months of reports that the Prime Minister wanted to turf Canada's first female finance minister, we find out today that he's in talks to put an unelected, conflict of interest-riddled man into the role. The Globe and Mail story must have really stung for every single Liberal backbencher who has carried the water of this scandal-plagued Prime Minister for years. Why wouldn't they be getting this job? So my question is this. Does the Prime Minister really think that there is nobody, no one in the elected Liberal caucus who could be the finance minister? Anybody? No one?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the nature of the questions coming from the opposition today speak more about their opposition to feminism than it does our commitment to feminism. But that's typical, Mr. Speaker, because actions speak louder than words in this case. When we brought forward things like the Canada Child Benefit or child care, actual policies that help women, what did the Conservatives do? They voted against it. When we stand up for a woman's right to choose, what did the Conservatives do? They voted against it, bring in backdoor legislation to make it harder to access sexual health and reproductive rights in this country. When we work to make contraceptives free in this country, what did the Conservatives do? Stand in opposition. The real fake feminists are those folks on the other side of the Conservatives.
Alors, s'il vous plaît. S'il vous plaît. Order, please.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the report on Islamophobia tabled by the Justice Committee recommends that the federal government implement all the proposals made by the Senate in 2023 on the matter of Islamophobia. The Senate's recommendations, however, are a full-out attack on Quebec's secularism, which the Senate considers racist and Islamophobic. If this report was intended to combat Islamophobia, it has failed. It promotes Quebec bashing by claiming that Bill 21 encourages racism in Quebec. The government must reject the entire anti-Quebec report by the Justice Committee. Will it do so? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like my colleague knows full well, committees of this House are independent. They have the right and the duty to do the work that they want to do. Their recommendations are publicly shared, of course. And like all other members of this House, we will read these recommendations and see how they could be used or not be used. The Honourable Member for Drummond. The Justice Committee has taken up the demand by Amira Al-Gawabi that teachers be chosen on the basis of their religion rather than their competence. So what does Ottawa have to do with the hiring of university professors? Is there a Minister for Higher Education in Ottawa and they forgot to tell us in Quebec? Secondly, this proposal is the opposite of secularism. It's bringing religion back into our schools. And we saw what happened in Bedford and Saint-Maxime. Quebecers want nothing to do with this. When will this government stop attacking Quebec's secular model? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, committees of this House are independent. They do the work they deem to be useful for Canada and Canadians. Quebec universities are also independent and do the work that they wish to do with their jurisdictions and responsibilities. The Honourable Member for Drummond. The Senate has issued a report accusing Quebec secularism of all the wrongs. The Minister for Immigration says nothing. Amira Al-Gawabi calls Quebecers anti-Muslim. The Immigration Minister has remained silent. The Justice Committee tables a report repeating the Senate's anti-secularism arguments. Not a problem for the Minister for Immigration. Ottawa proposes choosing teachers based on their religion. Still great news for the Immigration Minister, apparently. But if François Legault wants to defend Quebec secularism, the Minister suddenly loses his temper and condemns a Quebec Premier. Why is this Minister lashing out at Quebec in particular? The Honourable Minister for Public Works and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bloc MPs are doing everything they can to seek out squabbles, but we're not going to be part of this. I'm not quite sure what happened on the other side of the aisle, but when it is not your turn to talk, when you're not recognised, it's important to not speak. If you want to have a chat among yourselves or a squabble among yourselves, then you can do so in the antechambers.
Member from Halton, Norfolk.
The Prime Minister has lost control of spending in his cabinet. The Liberals are about to smash through a $40 billion deficit guardrail. The media is reporting that the Prime Minister is forcing inflationary spending on Canada's first female finance minister by forcing her to break through the $40 billion deficit guardrail and pushing our country over a fiscal cliff. Everybody knows that Mark Carney is the de facto finance minister. So why is this Prime Minister bullying the first female finance minister and forcing her to take the fall?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think what we're seeing here today is Conservatives trying to make feminism great again, but what they actually do is they don't elect women to their party. The leader actually uses misogynistic hashtags that promote violence against women. Mr. Speaker, they don't support reproductive health care for women. They want to ban abortion health care for women. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to feminism, it's pretty clear Conservatives are struggling, and this seems like a fight they don't want to take with us.
So it's turning out that the Liberal is trying to defend feminism, but the Conservative is trying to, work on the economy. It's common sense, right? So it's not about feminism leading the country or ladies are leading the country, but it's about the skill of how to manage the country and make it move forward according to the economy of the Canada. Okay, thank you.